What should I call your event name?
Sorry?
Sorry.
What should I call your event name on Facebook?
Um, a room full of lights.
Okay. UNSW Photo Club.
Yes.
Cool, you guys are live?
Are we ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Go for it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's A Room Full of Light. I'm one of the hosts today, and some information manager of UNSW Photo Club.
Hi guys, my name is Sadab Bassett. I'm the marketing manager here at UNSW Photo Club. Before we get started, we'll just do a quick welcome to country. So I wish to acknowledge the custodians of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and their elders past and present. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and their contribution that they make to the life of this city and this region.
Okay, so before we start, first of all, let's just start off with talking about what is UNSW Photo Club. So UNSW Photo Club is one of the club that we our theme is photography. So what we provide usually we have tutorial, workshops, outings, road trips, as well as equipment loans and also competitions. Because of the current COVID-19 situation, we have paused some of the events, but we will just resume it after we're back in normal. So if you would like to join us after this tutorial, feel free to go to our website www.uns.photo.com/join us. So to talk about Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. So what is Lightroom? Lightroom is a photo editing software which is similar to the camera raw function in Photoshop. It is a kind of non-destructive editing, so that means the original photo is not being edited. Instead, it's just apply those filters, effects on top of the original photo and export the new one. So this software is used by professional photographers as well as enthusiasts. So today we are using the Lightroom Classic 9.3 version as for today's demonstration, which is the latest version. So if you find that why your Lightroom is different from ours, maybe it's because of the version. So some people may ask, what is the Lightroom difference between Lightroom and Lightroom Classic? When you go on Adobe's website, you may find these two products. Nowadays, Adobe would like to mention on more Lightroom, which is on the right-hand side one, which includes desktop, web, as well as mobile. So basically it is a cloud solution where your photos is stored on the cloud. But like the one we are demonstrating today is like the Lightroom Classic. So it is the desktop version. Your photos is stored being offline, and but the reason why we're using this one is because it has more functions. So you may ask like what to choose, and for using desktop or laptop, then we prefer to use Lightroom Classic. So like today we are using Lightroom Classic as a demonstration. But if you just have your mobile phone and you would like to just download the app and edit the photo, you can download Lightroom on App Store as well as Play Store, which is for free for the basic functions. But of course, if you need advanced, then you need subscription from Adobe. So when we take photos, you may be allowed, the camera may ask you like what kind of format you want. So in like usual standard camera, we have JPEG and RAW function, just like Canon, Nikon, Sony, and so on. So for JPEG, is usually for sharing. It is a compressed image which has a white balance and a lower color depth. But the pros is that it has a smaller file size, so it is good for sharing, like putting on social media, like Facebook, IG, maybe to upload to like some sort of document as document based. But with RAW, it is like the original light information captured by the sensor. So that means it has more information where you can adjust your white balance, you have more color depth, and but of course, it has a larger file size. Usually, it's like few times larger than the JPEG version. So this kind of file format is only for post-production, and then you have to export. When we do export, we export back to JPEG for like sharing to like social media or maybe email, etc. So before we go to demonstration part, we are going to talk about the histogram. So histogram is something, is a chart that helps you to know about the exposure of your image. So on the x-axis is basically the shadow. On the left-hand side is the shadow. On the right-hand side is the highlight. And then the y-axis is the number of pixels at that tone level. So that means if you have, if it's the middle part has more pixels, that means it is well exposed. But if most of the pixels are at the right hand side, that means the photo is overexposed. But vice versa, on the left, if the pixels are on the left hand side, then it means that it is underexposed. So we are aiming for this kind of result when we do the photo editing. Even though maybe you take underexposure on purpose in order to preserve the highlight in the when you take the photo. When we do the editing, we usually bring it back to a well-exposed photo. So right now, we will do the demonstration to you, and now I will pass the time to Shadab, and he will begin with the import of the Lightroom.
Hi guys, so I'll be showing you the basic introduction to the Lightroom editing. So when we first open up Lightroom, you won't have any of the pictures that you see here. It'll basically be a blank screen. So to start importing pictures, what we want to do is you want to go to the bottom right here where you say import export. So we want to click this button here. And after we click this button, it might take a while just to load because it's detecting all the sources in your computer. So in the left side, you'll see the sources. This is basically where you can import pictures from. So for me, I have my local disk drive, which is local disk C. So that's my computer drive. If you attach your SD card and your USB hard drives, will come up as a DEF or whatever other files that you put down. Now on the top, we can see that there's different options in moving the data. So you can copy as a DNG, which is basically another format for RAW files, which is like a standard version, other than like, Sony has their own type of files, Canon has their own, your phone has their own type of files. But DNG is a standardized RAW format. You can copy, you can move, or you can add. I personally don't like copying as DNG because I like to keep my RAW files as it is, because Lightroom is really good at recognizing your camera's manufacturer's RAW files, so I don't really want to mess around with that. I would either copy or move. Most SD cards, if you format them to your camera, this option would be the only one. You won't be able to move the pictures. So you'll be copying it from your SD card to your computer, and then later on you might have to delete it in your camera. Move is the move option is available when you're trying to move from a hard drive or a USB stick, or from your own computer system itself. So after we looked at the ways of moving the pictures, on the right top screen we can see that the local disk key. This is where the files will be stored. Now, as I said, I only have my computer here, so I've stored my photos in OneDrive Pictures, Lightroom RAW. So this is my computer Surface 2020. So these are all my 2020 pictures are going to be stored at. Just please bear with me. Lightroom likes to, sometimes get a bit slow. Whilst we wait a sec for Lightroom to get acquainted with itself, Anson, let's just discuss
Yes.
what brought you into photography? That's one of the questions a lot of our members ask us when they first
Well,
join.
actually, like in the past, the reason why I'm into photography was because I love traveling. So that's why I take the camera with me and travel to different countries, different places, and capture um, the moments about your journey, as well as like the views, sceneries there. So how about you, Shada?
For me, I actually got into photography because I was doing my HSC and I was so bored with like repeating the questions after and after again that I was like what else can I do to like, occupy my time? And I found that photography, like I had a camera actually in my home for 7 years. I got it as a present for getting into the high school that my parents wanted to get into. And they were photography enthusiasts, but I never actually understood how a camera worked because it is quite intimidating. Like compared to your phone, when you just take like a normal picture and then when you're using a DSLR with all these buttons and stuff, it doesn't make any sense. It is quite intimidating. But in my HSC, after I was near the end of it, I took the camera and I played around with it, and it was so interesting that you can take like 10 different images of the same thing by just changing your settings. And from there on, I was just with the technical aspect, the creative aspect, because I am studying a degree that's heavily involved in mathematics, finance, probability, and by doing photography, it's just a nice release from the structured approach to learning that we have in that degree. Bear with me, I'm just trying to fix this here. Anson, would you like to just start off with the portraiture first before I go into
Yeah,
land?
sure. Maybe we just start off with the night landscape.
Yeah,
So
yeah, let's
that
do
would be
that.
a bit easier. So give me a second. So when you come to Lightroom, first things that you have to do is import. So you go to File, and then you go to Import Photos and Videos. So here, I'll select the files that I want to edit, and then I'll just select the photos that I want to import. So after that, you just hit the import button. But of course, I've imported the photos right already, so I will just press the cancel button. So after you have import your photos and videos into here, mainly photos, then you select the photos that you want to edit and you click develop. So after you click the develop button, sorry, you will see your photos. So that's an edited version. So we'll just first walk around with you about the basic interface of Lightroom. First of all, on the left-hand side is your preview, and then you have all kinds of presets. So you have presets here. So you have default, you have the Adobe lens correction and also noise reduction. So for today, I will be using this one. And then you are, of course, you have black and white, you have all kinds of presets. And on the right hand side, it is the histogram. So that's what I just mentioned just now. And so now let's begin with the editing. So first of all, we just introduce with you with the crop function. So with crop function, you hit this button, and then you can select your aspect ratio. Okay, maybe I want 16:9, then I just hit the 16:9 button. Or I want to keep original, then we just don't have to do it. But if you think, oh, you want to crop something out, and then maybe just I don't want the shape on the left hand side, I just want the buildings on the right hand side. So I can just crop like something like this, and then hit the enter button. But we're just back to original. Okay, so after that, you have the profile. So you have different color profile that you can select. Adobe Landscape, Profile, Portrait. And also you can select the camera viewing camera color settings. So with RAW, because we have just captured the sensor information, so we did not apply any color profile into the photos. So that means we have to apply it right now. So with here, we have the basis adjustment. So we got the white balance. So if we have higher balance, white balance, that means in Kelvin, it has a warmer tone. If it's cooler, then we have a lower white balance. So we can adjust according to the actual environment, the white balance. So actually white balance adjust depends on the color of light. Like in midday, it's like 6,500 or 5,500, so between this range. But in other time, the white balance could be different. So right now we just go to exposure as well as contrast. So with contrast, we can increase the contrast, but because since as you have seen here, this photo is obviously underexposed as what we have mentioned just now. So I will put up the exposure to a well exposed photo. Okay, so we have increased 1.25 EV. And then because the building here is just too bright, so we just bring down the highlight. So you can see the highlights are just gone. There are a bit of whites. So and then we just increase the shadow. So shadow means that like here, these are the shadows of the photos. So we just increase a bit to a suitable amount. For texture, it is a new function. So maybe if you are using the old version of Lightroom, you may not be able to find this. So what texture means? Texture means basically if you put the slider to put the positive side, it means sharpening as well as clarity. But if you put on the left hand side, that means the negative one, it would be smoothen the skin tone. So for landscape, you want to sharpen it. So that's why we just put a bit. And then for vibrance, so what is the difference between vibrance and saturation? For saturation, you increase the saturation to make the whole photo become more vivid. But for vibrance, it is about the mid-tone. That means the color that are not that saturated, so we can increase to make it more vivid. So vibrance is more natural. And then dehaze, so it's just have to use to remove some foggy. We just put some on there. And then afterwards, oh, by the way, if you have see clearly, you find some this kind of plain headlights. So if you want to remove that, you can use the clone function. And we've got clone function here. Done. So we just remove these kind of lights. That means some objects that you don't want to be in your photo. So after this part, we just head off to editors. I've just mentioned before we do that, because I've used the presets here, that means all those lens correction has been enabled. If you cannot find your camera lens profile, you click here and you select the model. So with noise reduction being enabled, now we can go to split toning. So split toning is something that are features that can affect the tone of the whole photo. So if I put a warmer, it sounds very warm, colorful. But if I put on the blue, it seems like very modern. So this highlights and shadow. Highlights means the like white color, and then these are not that dark, so these are a bit lighter. And for shadow is a bit more for the dark side of the color. So I would like to adjust like this to make this photo warm, but on the shadow I want to make it cool, so we'll just adjust like this. So it seems like the contrast is not enough, so we'll just put a bit more. Yeah. So after this, we are basically done with one photo. So right now, actually, Shadab, are you ready to back on to your part?
Yep. So let's continue with the day landscape. Yep. I'll just take
Sure.
over
So
now.
now I'll just pass the time to Shadab, and he will begin this part.
Hey guys, so I'm going to do the day landscape aspect of the editing. So let's just start with one example. So everyone has their own style of editing the photos. So, and after you start using Lightroom, you'll get some hang of how you prefer to edit your photos. But for me personally, what I like to do first is that I like to look at the composition of the image. What aspects of the photo do I like? What aspects of the photo do I not like? So in this image, this was actually taken in Switzerland on a train. So if we zoom in here, we can see that the foreground is a bit blurry. And I personally like that because it indicates the fact that we're in a moving object in a frame. So I like that. And the background you can see is nice and sharp. There's no blurriness in the background at all. So I like that contrast between the blurriness foreground and the sharp background. However, when I was observing this image, there's one thing I didn't like. If I zoom in at the top here, we can see this slight reflection in the sky, which is basically the reflection from the train window. And I personally don't like that. So to remove this aspect of the image, what I want to do is go to the crop overlay tool right here, and I click this. And then what I just want to do is just move this down, and then it will take the reflection out, and it'll make it much more like a panoramic image with the aspect ratio. There's other things you can do. You can do other things as well. Like for example, as Anson mentioned, you can keep the aspect ratio the same and just move it up and down like this. But for me, I like a bit of like a panoramic look to my for my landscape images. So I moved it down, and I also took out the reflection, and it gave a nice aspect ratio there. The second thing I want to do after I've done the composition aspect of the image is actually do the lens correction. Now, a lot of people, what they do is after they did the correction of the composition, they go into the basic panel here, and then they start, changing the exposure, contrast, highlights. But I don't personally like to do that. What I like to do is go to the lens correction section, which is right here. I click this tab here. Now, my rationale behind it is that when you enable this lens, enable profile correction, you see the histogram, it actually changes. So after you made your edits and then you go down and enable profile correction, all your edits will be changed because the histogram changes and Lightroom does its automatic corrections. So I like to start off by using enable profile correction. So what does this actually do? Well, when I click this, you can see that the image actually starts flattening out because most beginner lenses, they have a bit of distortion in the lenses. So to correct that, Lightroom has profiles for each lens that people use, and it will apply the distortion correction that they think is correct. So we can see here, this is my lens. It's a 17 to 55 millimeter, and that applies correctly. But you can see all these other lenses as well that, that's in the database. If your lens is not there, you can actually do manual correction, like so. Or you can just pick one that, if Lightroom doesn't detect it properly, you can pick one yourself. So let's just do the basic automatic correction. So as I said, it fixes up the distortion in the image. But one thing you also realize is that in the corners, before I enable it, it's very dark in the corners. When I enable it, the corners lighten up. So that's what you call vignetting. So vignetting is the dark or lightening of the corners, and they'll correct it depending on what type of lens you have. Now, the second thing you see here is remove chromatic aberration. So what chromatic aberration actually is the green tinging you see around objects. So you'll see that in this road here, there's a green tinge around the edge of the road. If I remove chromatic aberration, you see that the green tinge significantly decreases. So I'll enable that again. You can see the green tinge here, and then I'll enable that here, and you can see the green tinge significantly gone. So that's chromatic aberration. Yeah, that's a funny word to say. So every time I edit a picture, I like to enable chromatic aberration because it doesn't hurt the image in any way. However, enable profile correction, you just have to see if it helps with the distortion in the image. Sometimes it's actually better to leave it off depending what type of picture you've taken, but for most landscapes, I like to enable it because you're shooting usually at a very wide focal length, as you can see here. So it's 17 millimeters, so that's quite wide. So after I've enabled these two, then I would go back to the main menu. Now, the first thing I like to do is look at the white balance. So as Anson mentioned earlier, as you move it to the right, the image gets warmer. As you move it to the left, the image gets cooler. There is no technically correct answer on what to do. It's more just personal preference. So a lot of people like their image to be a bit more warm for effect. Other people like it to be cool. And you can change this by either manually sliding it along, or you can do as shot, which is what your camera thinks. Auto is what Lightroom thinks. As you can see, Lightroom didn't really make a good judgment on what the white balance should be. The camera, in fact, was slightly better. But I like this image to be a bit more warmer because it was in the daytime, so I want that, the sun rays to be felt. So I'll move it to the right a bit. It's very slight adjustment, but you can just see the difference. So it was cool here, and I made it a bit more warmer to signify it's during the day. So after I've done white balance, then I would go down to the exposure tab. Now, exposure tab, as you can see, you can put auto, But when you put order, Lightroom does its own tricks that I don't really like, and most photographers are not in agreement with it. So what we'll do is we'll increase it ourselves. So I don't want to decrease it because it's already pretty good exposure. So I might just increase it slightly just to bring the foreground up a bit more. So let me just do that. So I like that. That's pretty nice. So it's +2, plus 0.2, and that's a pretty nice exposure. Now for day landscapes, majority of the time for highlights and shadows, I like to move the highlights completely down. That just brings the sky like into the dynamic range properly, as you can see. If I make it normal, the sky's completely gone. Here it's, you can't even, yeah, it's not even there. So I like to move the highlights down. You see the skies come back. You can see the distinction between the clouds and the sky, blue sky. But the thing is, the foreground looks a bit dark. It's not matching with the background. So what I want to do is I want to increase the shadows. So after I've increased the shadows, the foreground is much nicer. Maybe I was a bit too much, maybe 71 is nice, yeah. The foreground and the background are matching very nicely. However, it's a bit flat. There's not much dimension to the image, but we'll fix that later on. Next is whites and blacks. So there's two ways of changing whites and blacks. Well, there's three, but there's two proper ways of doing it. First is called a technical adjustment. That's what technically you should do, which is, I'll show you how to do it manually, but first how the technical adjustment works is that you press the control button, then the shift button on your keyboard, and then you double click whites, and then you'll do a technical adjustment. So that's what the technical correct way of doing it. And what that means is that, let me show you how to do that manually. So I press Alt, screen goes black. This is how to do a correct technical adjustment. You move the slider until you see white starting to appear. So I move the slider to the left, you can't really see anything because look at that, that's just not what you're meant to do. So you want to go to the right and you stop until when you start to see some whites. So I start to see some whites, I'll move back a bit, 15. So that's a correct technical adjustment. So I did that manually. Let's see if it's similar when I do the technical adjustment. So Control Shift, double click whites, it's 11. So I was pretty close. So 14, 15, 11, that's pretty nice. So for whites, for landscape day images, technical adjustments what I like to do. Blacks, you can do technical adjustments as well. So Control Shift, double click, and it will do the correct technical adjustment, what Lightroom thinks. However, for landscape images during the day, I like to add a bit more depth to the image, a bit more blackness, especially in the foreground. So I don't like to do the technical adjustment. What I like to do is press Control and then start playing around with the slider. So I like a bit of clipping in my image, a bit of black in the image. So let's see, a bit of depth is nice for me. I moved it to the left and I keep on going until I start to see a bit of clipping. And we can see the trees are starting to clip here, and I like that. It adds a bit of depth to the trees. So that's pretty nice. So after I did the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, then I move on to the presence. So clarity, as Anshin mentioned earlier, clarity is basically adding perceived sharpness to the image. It's making the image look like you've taken it with a high megapixel camera when it actually isn't. How that's actually doing is that it's actually boosting the mid-tone contrast. So in the middle part here, I'll boost the contrast here so the image looks a bit sharper. So for landscape images, I like to play with the clarity and dehaze slider personally. These three sliders all play with the sharpness, the contrast of the image. So first, what I would like to do is I want to move the clarity slider. Now I'm going to move the clarity and dehaze slider together. So normally, if you're just moving the clarity, I'll move it around to 20. But since I'm going to move dehaze as well, I move it to around 14. That what basically does is that makes the image look a bit more sharper, and it also increases the mid-tone contrast. Now dehaze, what it actually does is that it makes it more distinction in the sky. It separates the cloud from the skies much more clearly. So and it also adds a lot of sharpness to the image as well. So I'll move that to around 8. 14 and 8 to around 20, that's what I like. And this depends on personal preference as well. Some people like more, some people like less. So let's just look at the difference in the sky. So this is when dehaze is applied, and this is before it was applied. You can see it's much more white. There's not much blue depth to the sky. And all these little subtle changes will add up at the end when we look at the final result. The next sliders are vibrance and saturation. Now, what these do is that they increase the saturation of the colors, but they do it differently. What vibrance actually does is that it increases the saturation of the unsaturated colors, to put it simply, while saturation increases the saturation of all the colors. And I don't personally prefer to touch this slider that much. the main thing I'll do is actually move it down a bit rather than increasing it, because it just makes the image look a bit too much over processed. So I'll leave the saturation by itself, and then I'll play around with the vibrance. Okay, so I'll play around with the vibrance. As I said, vibrance increases saturation of the unsaturated colors. So with vibrance, as I said, it's personal preference, but I like for landscapes to be around 12 to 15. That's what I like for my landscape images. And it just makes the image pop. So I've added more mid-tone contrast. It was flat before, but now it looks it pops much more now. So then finally, I'd go into split toning. Sorry, HSL color. So HSL color tab here. And the HSL color tab, the reason why I didn't touch saturation is because, as I said, it saturates all the colors, and I don't want to do that. For landscape images, depending on the image I'm taking, I want to specifically adjust the colors. So when I'm doing trees, sky, mountains, what are the main colors I have to look for? I have to look for blues. Aqua's not so much, but it will help with the shading in the sky, and the greens. So let's move that. So for saturation, I'd move the saturation of the greens maybe +2 or 3, not much. So +2, blues, aquas +2, and then blues +2 as well. It just adds a bit more depth to the image, adds a bit more pop to the image. Very slight differences, but it'll all add up at the end. So that's basically done for the first image. It looks pretty nice. I'll show you the before and after. So this is what we started with, and that's the final result that you can get with just these slight adjustments. Now this will take, when you first start photography and you start taking raw images, when you import your images, you'll be like, oh my God, this looks so bad. But with a lot of practice and time, you can achieve, very good results. And the great thing about Lightroom, as I mentioned earlier, it's non-destructive. So when you're playing around with this, you're not actually touching the picture itself. The Lightroom, what's actually doing is it's just layering on top of the original picture. And another great thing is that you can actually create various copies of the same image. So you can just play around with it to see what you personally like. So we've gone through the first edit, and I'm going to show you a second edit just to reinforce the points that I made and show you some other techniques that you can use for landscape day images. So this is the image after it was a thunderstorm that occurred. And then we can see that in this image, it's pretty dark in the foreground. The sky is completely gone, but don't worry, we can save it. So first thing I want to look at is the composition. Am I happy with the composition? Is it straight? With the general composition, I'm pretty happy with it. But I'll just show you a tool that you can use here, which is called the angle. You can actually change, if your camera is a bit bent, you can actually change how the angle works. And you can do auto angle, which Lightroom, what it thinks is automatic, but I'm pretty happy with the original image, so I'm not going to touch that. So let's just take that out. Okay, so let's start playing around with the image. So first thing I want to do, go down to lens correction. So I want to enable profile correction, and it removes the slight distortion. As you can see in the corners here, it fixes the distortion. See the corners, they get fixed up very nicely. And remove chromatic aberration. This is a really good example of how remove chromatic aberrations work. So as we can see in the poles, there's a green tinge right around the poles here. When I remove chromatic aberration, it's completely gone. So it's a much clearer example in this one. You see the trees, the leaves here, chromatic aberration is gone when you press that. So that's the two things that I've done here. And as we can see, the histogram changes when I enable this. So I want to enable this first. And then I'm going to go into the white balance. As I said before, it's all personal preference on what white balance you prefer. Let's just look at what happens when we play around with the sliders. This is what auto. See, Lightroom just likes it to be too warm. I don't like this one, too warm. As shot, pretty cool, nice. For this image, as it was taken after a thunderstorm, it was actually the hailstorm last year in Sydney. I like a bit of coolness. It shows the mood and depth to the image. So I like the coolness in the image. So I won't touch the temperature for this image. The second thing I want to go to is exposure. So it is a bit dark in the foreground. So I want to increase the exposure of this image a bit. So let's move it to +2. It just brightens up the image a bit more, and we'll play around with the highlights and shadows to fix it even more. So with the highlights, what I want to do is I want to decrease the highlights, and then that brings the sky back much more into focus here. We can see the sky is much clearer compared to here. It was completely gone here. When I move the highlights down, the sky comes back in life. Foreground, it's very dark. I can't see the details. I can't see the leaves in the foreground, the hail. I can't see any of that. So what I want to do is I want to increase the foreground. And I think 64, it's a nice balance between this sky and foreground. As you can see, just playing with what 4 to 5 sliders, we've made a massive difference to the image that we have. So, and it's much, pops much more than what we had originally. So whites and blacks, as I said, Control Shift for technical adjustment is what Lightroom thinks, or you can go back and Alt and then change. So let's do it this way. It's black, black, and we want to wait until it starts to clip. Continue on, continue on. Okay, so we're starting to clip here, so we'll move back. That's fine. And then blacks, Control Shift, and that should be good as well. For texture, for clarity, as I said, I like around 14, so move it around 14, because I want to add a bit more dehaze to the sky, so make it much more clear. So that's 8, so 8 to 14. So it brings much more depth to the sky. As before, after, slight differences, it'll make do at the end. And vibrance, as I said, around 14, 8, 10 to 15 is good. I like that. Now in this image, what I wanted to show is how to use the graduated filter. So the graduated filter, what it does is that it changes the exposure in certain areas, but it leaves the exposure in other areas. Now the reason why I want to use this in this image is because the sun on the side here is just overexposed compared to the rest of the image. So I want to click the graduated filter button, sorry. And then I want to press O. It says selected mask overlay, so I pressed O, and then I want to move it down like this. And when I press O, what it shows is that where the effect is being applied. So I'll move this down, and because I want to put a graduated filter on the sun, I don't want to affect the other parts of the image, so I'll just play around with it. One sec. So I'm playing with this one. Okay. Move it across like so. And then, so this is the effect of this is the graduated filter. So what effect do I want to put on it? So I can do contrast, highlight shadows. I want to decrease the exposure because I want the sun to, have the rays of the sun to see much more clearly. So I press O just to see the effect that I'm doing. So I know it's going to be applied on the left, and then I just want to push it up a bit because I don't want the building to be affected that much. Let's see where it's being applied. Yeah, that should be nice. And I just press O again, and let's see the balance. The balance is very nice compared to everything else. It's a bit brighter, which I like. It shows the suns from the top left, and this place is a bit darker, but it's not too bright like it was before. So I press done. Look at the before and after. See, it's very bright compared to here. And then I want to press the graduated filter. It brings down the left side of the image. So let's look at the before and after with what we've done. The before, we can see the left side is completely blown. The image, the foreground is very dark. The sky is blown out. Not much balance there. And this is the after image. The left side, you can see the sun coming in. It's still brighter than the right side, but it's not overexposed. The foreground, you can see the shimmering of the rainwater. You can see the hail. You can see the leaves. It's much more contrast, much more dynamic range right there. Now, a second part that I want to show you is panoramas. So panoramas are great, especially when you're traveling. When you're traveling, a lot of people can't bring like multiple lenses. You usually bring one lens, which is your standard zoom range lens. And when you want to take landscape pictures, one of the great restrictions is that you don't have enough focal length to actually take the whole picture. So a great way to do that, to compensate for that, is to actually take panoramas in Lightroom. So how panoramas can work is most people have the misconception that you need a tripod to take panoramas, when in fact, you can actually do it handheld. So this panorama that I actually took was in Hong Kong, where I had to do a 30-minute trek up a hill to take this picture, and I couldn't be, bothered to take my tripod. It's just too heavy. So I chose the panorama route. So what I want to do is I want to use my camera, have a fast shutter speed, and pan my camera left and right. So as we can see in this image here, I'll show you an example. So you start in the middle, and then you start panning. We start panning slowly. And then you start panning as so, and this is just me taking multiple pictures. And I just move the camera around to capture the whole image. So after I've done all the panning, what I want to do is I want to press Control, select all the images, right click, and then I want to go to Photo Merge. So there's HDR, there's Panorama, and then HDR Panorama. I want to click Panorama. So after I pick Panorama, Lightroom will start processing the image, and you can see the different options that we have on the right. But I don't want to, it's just going to take a while because you're merging all these files together. I'll show you what the final result is after doing the panorama. So after you do the photo merge panorama, this is the final result that you're going to get. Lightroom will merge all the pictures together and apply auto settings, which you can change by just going to the develop module. And you can just start changing the settings like a normal picture if you don't like what Lightroom has done. But you can see, we're taking all these little pictures and then you have this big image here. And the great thing about panoramas is that it's a much higher resolution compared to taking pictures with a standard lens, because what you have essentially here is 20 photos. You're taking 20 photos and you're merging them into one. So you have 20 times essentially the megapixels they would have with a standard photo. So it's much more sharper, and it's a much better way of actually taking wide angle landscape pictures. So now I'm gonna hand over to Anson, who's gonna do some other editing types and also show you HDR as well.
Thank you, Shadab. So right now, I will be taking up the HDR part, as well as I will be talking about the portrait as well. So right now, as you can see, here is another photo of the pig in Hong Kong. And basically, I've just merged it. So this is the merge result, but I have to edit it. So we'll just talk about how to merge them first. So to merge them, just select these photos that you want. So usually it's like one in the 0 EV, one in negative 1 EV, as well as one in +1. So we have we call this photo bracketing. So we take 3 photos with -1, 0, and +1. And then after that, we just merged it. So we select photo merge, and then HDR. And then after that, you have to preview. And just to save time, I just merged it just now. So the ghost is basically depends on the movement of the object. So if we in this photo, you have lots of movement objects. So in this case, then you have to bump up this ghost. So if you're just static photo, then you can go for low or even none. So we have the photo right now. So we have this. So right now we can just do the editing. So with the editing, just like usual, we do the contrast, shadow, highlight, and etc. But of course, just enable the camera correction, and then we just bring down a bit of the brightness. So basically, I would like to bring down the highlight because of those lights, and then we'll just bump up the texture as well as the vibrance. So with the haze, you can see it's a bit more clear, especially in the middle part where the bright, where it's just too bright over there. So you can zoom in and see if everything looks good. So right now it should be good, and then we'll just do the split toning. So because this one is in ISO 100, so I'm not going to do the noise reduction as it is not that necessary. So in this photo, I would like to make a very modern tone. So I will put on blue. As well as for the shadow. Yep. So after I feel that's very enough. So basically that's the end of the HDR photo. So right now we'll just proceed to the portrait photo. So we've got one portrait photo here, and first of all, we enable the lens correction. So with this camera, for some reason, it cannot detect the photo, camera lens. So because this one is taken by a Nikon camera, So and a Nikon lens, so we just find Nikon, and then it can detect for some reason. So with this photo, first of all, I would like to bring up a bit of contrast, and then bring down the highlight, as well as some, put up the shadow. So because this is portrait photo, so usually I will put down the texture. So to make a skin looks more whitened, so usually I will put up the luminance of the orange in the color section, so it looks more bright. And then we also got the white balance to adjust. So for this photo, I want to make it a bit warm. So this time we can make use of the white balance to create the tone of the photo. So basically, that's pretty much for the photo. So when you come here and maybe you see, oh, the model has some pimple or something that you don't want, so you can make use of the clone tool to improve the skin. So it's just, for this one, it's just not so good. So usually, if you want more accurate result, I would prefer you to use a smaller one. So it just looks a bit better right now. So with that, that's pretty much for this photo. So right now we do the export section. So the way that I do is usually I will press P. P for stand for pick, and then we pick that photo, we flag that photo. And then for a photo that I don't want, I just press X as reject. And then I just pick this one, P again, and then X. So, and then the last one, I want to export, so I select as P. And afterwards, you go to filter, and you find flagged, and then you Control A or Command A, depends on your OS, and then you go to File, Export. And then with export, you can select, choose to what I do is I choose the photo later on, and then usually it may ask like existing file, so what to do, so you just keep there. So because if you want to overwrite, then you can just overwrite, or you don't want to overwrite. It sometimes depends. And with export, as I just mentioned earlier, we usually use JPEG. Of course, you can use other format as well, but the most standard one that maybe you export to your friends or your client would be JPEG, and then we set the color space as sRGB, because most displays only support sRGB. So we keep all those metadata. You can choose not to export those metadata as well. And after that, you export and then edit it. So basically, I usually create a folder of edit photo, so I know that's ready to share. Right now, because yesterday I've done some, so what we do is just overwrite. And then right now we are just exporting it. And then in the folder, basically it is just exporting, so we have to wait for a second. Now it's done. So basically what we have got here, so first of all, we got this photo. It's like this, where we export. So usually you may find, oh, why the preview quality in the Lightroom is not that nice compared with the one you export, because the inside Lightroom is just for you to preview. So sometimes the quality is not as nice as your results. Just do it again. And then the other photo will be like this. And then you can zoom in if you want to. So for some reason, the first photo is not being exported correctly, so we just do the export again. Right now, it's back to normal, so we've got this one. So basically, that's pretty much that I want to talk about today. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in our Facebook page or just type in the Zoom or as well as the Facebook chat box. So we'll just try to answer you if you have got any questions. Shadab, would you like to anything to add on?
No, not really. If you guys want to learn more about Lightroom, Photoshop, how to take pictures, we have workshops at the first 4 weeks of every semester. So every term, first 4 weeks we'll have our workshops running with Lightroom, Photoshop, exposure, focus. And that's more of a one-to-one or like a small group type of thing. So we have 4 to 5 members and then one presenter. And we address your issues and questions personally by showing live demonstrations on the screen as well. So that's a great opportunity for you guys to learn a bit more about Lightroom and photography in general. And
Cool.
another thing I'd like to say is that a lot of people, are intimidated by this software. I'll just say that as with anything, the more time you spend on it, the better you get. Just play around with it. If you make mistakes, don't worry about it. I remember my first edit, I made my saturations like 50, 30, 40. It was pretty horrendous, but like as I kept on, practicing and finding my skills, I got better and better. But if you guys want a really fast way of learning, I would recommend you check this guy out. I'll just share my screen. 1 second. So this gentleman here, named Anthony Morganti, he's actually he's the person I learned a lot of my editing skills from. He goes through things like quick starts, split toning, the different tools you have, portrait retouching in Lightroom. So he teaches about sharpening and noise. So he has all these episodes, like 50 episodes, each 45 minutes, 30 minutes long. And it's a great resource, a free resource, in fact, for everyone to learn from. How about Anson? Do you have any recommendations for people?
Yeah, actually, as what Shadab has just said, YouTube is a very good platform to learn about photography. There's a lot of great photographers as well as videographers on there, so you can just basically go there and search. For example, today we're talking about Lightroom, so you just search for Lightroom tutorial, and there should be a lot of great resources, especially when it comes to like Photoshop. It's very advanced software. So even for us, actually, I don't really use like most of the functions. So if you don't know or you don't understand, actually internet is a very good resources that you can just go on and you search for it. And of course, our workshops is also very good opportunity. So maybe in the workshop you can like bring your photo and ask like how to edit, or we'll just give some advice on you. So that will just a way to improve your photography level. So just learn from practicing your skills. So it takes time to build up the sense, but when you just try one time and then we try the other time, then you will know how to manage these stuff. You have to learn from your mistake, from your error.
Yeah, exactly. Like in terms of advice, even in our club, we have a lot of execs who get actually paid to take videos and pictures. And if you bring your photos in, we're more than happy to give you advice. I remember in my first Lightroom tutorial, like I had like a very shy, very shy members. But as I kept on teaching them and showing the demonstration, a lot of them came up to me at the end like, "Oh, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Like, how do I learn this?" And that was a very great experience for me. Like initially you have a very shy audience and they open up as they see you're very genuine and you want to help them out, so that's a great thing that we offer.
Yeah, so basically we have like all kinds of members. So we have some members that just aren't that familiar. So people just came to the workshop and they asked, "Oh, can you just do the revision for me?" Just like studying. So
Exactly,
just
like we kind of cater towards everyone. You don't need to have a camera as such. You can use your phone
yeah.
and do a lot of the things we teach you. Like you don't necessarily have to have a camera. And if you're interested in getting into photography like as a hobby, we also offer like lenses and camera bodies for hire, like for free. Like you can just try them out for a week, pay a security deposit, and you get to see what photography is like. and if you're really passionate about it. That's
Yeah,
really nice.
actually, Shadab mentioned very good point. Just use the phone. That is really, really enough for beginners nowadays. You don't have to get a digital camera in order to start like 10 years ago. So with that, actually, if you are using Android phone, you can take raw photos. With iPhone, I think you can download some apps, and then you can also take raw pictures. But of course, Apple did a very good job in terms of their color. So
Yeah.
basically, even you take JPEG in the iPhone, it's already very good enough for sharing. And then maybe you come to Lightroom or maybe Snapseed or Visco, and then you just do some tuning, and it's very good already. And where you can just share on your social media like IG, Facebook, or even putting on your website.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think, we don't really have that many other questions from members. Do you think you have any concluding statements?
Yeah. So if you have any questions, I will just put a post in our Facebook page shortly, and you can just ask a question regarding this tutorial later on, so we can just reply you anytime, even though this Zoom and Facebook live is finished, so we can still answer your questions. If you would like to join us, remember to visit our social media as well as our website, so you can access the member information over there, and then you can join us if you really want to explore in photography. That where we just discuss photography. We have tutorials every week covering different topics. So in week 5, that means in 2 weeks time, we will be having our guest speaker to come. So we also invite our guest speaker to talk about different kinds of photography themes.
Awesome. Yeah, we have guest speakers when we get back to face teaching. We'll have free pizzas and drinks as well. So it's a very great atmosphere, very social environment for everyone, be a beginner or experienced. I think we're going to wrap it up soon. We're nearly hitting
Yep.
4 o'clock. Thanks everyone for joining the live stream on Zoom and also on Facebook. We appreciate you coming, and we hope to see you soon in our events.
Yep. Hope to see you soon. Thank you very much for attending.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.